Hello, everyone, and good morning to our friends in the West Coast. I'm here waiting for Tristan Harris, and it seems like he's going to be on in just a second.
There we go.
Here we go. Hi, Tristan.
Hey, how are you, Ida? Good to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you too. Welcome to Catapult Cloud. We've been at this since 9 this morning, Central European time. So now it's afternoon, and it's been a good day. It's been a good day of conversations, and we're now happy to invite all of you in from the West Coast as well. And your morning?
Yeah, it's 9 a.m. here in California. So.
9 a.m. in California. So you are the co-founder and president of Center for Humane Technology, and you're also a co-host for a podcast that is called Your Undivided Attention with Asa Raskin. He visited us at Catapult Future Fest last year. He stopped by. And you're a former design ethicist at Google. This December, you wrote something in the New York Times that really stuck with me. And I think even I posted it on Facebook and saying, like, if you're going to read one article this year, read that one. And I just wanted to read that little quote that really kind of touched me. And it starts with, to create humane technology, we need to think deeply about human nature. And that means more than just talking about privacy. This is a profound spiritual moment. We need to understand our natural strengths, our capacity of self-critical thinking for reasoned debate and reflection, as well as our weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and the parts of ourselves that we lost control over. The only way to make peace with technology is to make peace with ourselves. And I think it was just so beautifully put. And I really love that you're also taking it beyond privacy conversations and kind of tapping into our nature and what is profound human with us. And it feels like you're saying something in the direction of taking our self-esteem back from technology at some sense.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, given how you're framing that question, I think it would be helpful for me to share this little 2-minute presentation that I think will kind of set the context. Let me do that quickly.
Absolutely, please do.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen perfectly, yes.
And like this, great, okay. The reason I'm bringing this up, Ida, is because you're really mentioning this notion of making peace with ourselves, understanding ourselves. And oftentimes, at least up until the last couple of years, if you asked people who are in the kind of technology advocacy space, people who are fighting for technology to be humane, they're mostly focused on human rights and focused on privacy and data protection. And meanwhile, there's this whole other category that with our work and with my previous work as a design ethicist at Google that we felt was not fully being addressed, not even partially being addressed. And so, our whole organization and Asa Raskin, whose dad actually was the founder of the idea of humane technology. His dad was Jeff Raskin, who invented the Macintosh project. We wanted to come together and actually say, okay, there's a different thing that's wrong with technology. And we get that from E.O. Wilson, who said that the real problem of humanity that we have to reckon with is that we have these Paleolithic emotions from the Stone Age. Our brains are from the Stone Age. We have medieval institutions from the 16th, 17th century, and we have godlike technology. And this is the fundamental problem of humanity. And if you think about these three things operate on different clock rates. Our emotions, our desire for that, oh, I got 10 new followers, these 100 people liked my photo, that's an ancient emotion. And that emotion isn't going to change. As you said, our self-esteem is baked into the hardware of our brains. Our medieval institutions update very slowly. It takes like 6 years for something like GDPR to get out there. And then our godlike technology is accelerating at a faster and faster rate. So what do you do when you're in a car and your accelerator is going 1,000 times faster than your steering wheel can actually change course? You're going to crash. So the whole point is we have to actually align the steering wheel with the accelerator with the kind of GPS, which is our brains, which is getting so confused by technology. So let's zoom into these Paleolithic emotions. When I was a kid, I was a magician, and magic is always about basically understanding that human minds really do have these limits and vulnerabilities, that we're very easily hacked. And while we were all looking out for this moment when technology would overwhelm human strength and IQ, when it would take our jobs, right? We missed that there's this much earlier point when technology undermines human weaknesses, these Paleolithic emotions. And let's zoom into that. So let's see, like, what specifically, what are these things we're saying we have to make peace with ourselves? Okay, if we don't make peace with the fact that we have cognitive limits, we have 7 plus or minus 2 things we can hold in memory. When we don't make peace with that, we feel a problem called information overload, when technology hacks our cognitive limits. If we don't make peace with the fact that we have a dopamine system that likes these quick, rapid rewards, and it will privilege the immediate over the long term, when technology hijacks that, we get addictive use of technology. If we don't make peace with the fact that we have an intrinsic emotion for social validation and approval, then we'll see that as a problem called mass narcissism or influencer culture. Everyone has to be famous, and you have teenage mental health problems. If you don't deal with the fact that it feels good to get information that confirms your beliefs rather than information that challenges your beliefs, then you feel a problem called fake news. So when technology hacks confirmation bias, we feel that as fake news. When technology hacks our outrage, our Paleolithic emotions for outrage, we feel that as polarization. And when it hacks the fact that our brains, how do you know what to trust, Ida, right? Like, you trust me because I say I'm a Google design ethicist. It sounds like authoritative, right? But if you can hack those credibility signals for trust, then you can actually pretend to be someone you're not, like the Russian bots problem or deep fakes, where you can hack the foundations of what feels real or authoritative. So all these seemingly different problems on the right-hand side, information overload, addictive use, fake news, polarization, they're all happening at the same time. And they're part of a system of harms, because those lead to a second order set of problems. When you're overloaded, you get shortened attention spans, you get social isolation, you get teen depression and suicide, breakdown of our ability to know what's true, you get mass conspiracy theories and extremism. And none of these things have been more true than in a coronavirus era, where we're just seeking information constantly about the virus. We're more and more isolated. We get more and more conspiracy theories, and it's harder and harder to know what's true. So we've been trying to name a problem that's not been on the agenda of problems, which we call human downgrading, which is the connected system of all of these effects that are interrelated and mutually reinforcing. So we call this human downgrading, and it's kind of a circular feedback loop, because the more we use these technologies, the more we get downgraded, and then the harder it is to kind of actually keep up, because this is actually a much bigger problem than just addiction or distraction or fake news. It's the mass downgrading of human capacity. So if you're trying to fix this, you can't just say, like we said in the article, making peace with ourselves. We can't just say, I'm just gonna download that time tracker that tracks how much time I have for my phone. We're not going to fix it by turning off our notifications or going grayscale. That's not enough. We need a systemically different kind of system. Turning off notifications is like being in a burning building of climate change and saying, I know, let's ban straws. Like, that's not going to be a sufficient solution. It's like saying, I know, let's go grayscale, let's turn off notifications. So we need to actually have a much bigger solution. And the real answer is we have to regulate attention and surveillance capitalism. We have to not treat the human being as a resource that's meant to be mined, because if we're the resource, if we're the product, the race to the bottom of the brainstem to strip mine our cognition to extract our attention and our data will basically, really, it's an existential issue for society. And just, I'm going to actually skip through, well, I'll just do this really quickly. So our goal is to change how technology is built. I'm just going to do one last thing, just why this is actually so urgent. The reason why it's urgent is that the complexity of our critical problems as a species, as a civilization, are going up. If you think about climate change, environmental degradation, dangerous technologies, runaway financial system that we don't have control over, the world's getting more complicated, and we need human capacity to actually be able to meet those problems. But in general, the human capacity to respond to problems that we're creating at bigger and bigger scales is we're tapping out. If you have, exponential supply chains and exponential climate change, how do we actually rein in all of these harms that we're putting on the balance sheet of nature? The reason why human downgrading is existential is that it actually takes our capacity and then it pulls it down into outrage, distraction, fake news, narcissism, and isolation, because we cannot solve our problems if we're downgrading our capacity. And so what we really need is humane technology that actually upgrades our capacity to respond and meet our critical challenges. Because our attention economy, if you don't fix the attention economy, you can't fix any of our problems. Because what we're able to put our attention on the right things, on the systemic issues, that's where we have to put our attention. And so long as in capitalism, frankly, in industrial capitalism, the same way that a whale is worth more dead than alive, and a tree is worth more as lumber than as a tree, we're going to still just kill whales and destroy trees, and even if it starts climate change. In the same way with attention capitalism, we're worth more. Human beings are worth more. So long as we're worth more to outrage, polarized, distracted, and disinformed than if we're just a thriving, wise human being. We cannot solve this problem. So we have to change the business model of technology and regulate attention. Hopefully that was a good little introduction. I'll just go back to this now.
Well, no, that was lovely. Thank you so much. And it's kind of like we have put ourselves in a situation where we're like fight flight mode all the time, and it basically downgrades our reactions and put us into this reactive mode, and then we're trying to distract ourselves with all our devices, and then we have it going, and we can't really, as you say, like thrive as human being and be what we are really made for being, having a consciousness, having imagination, having creativity, and all these things, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, how are we better at making sense of the world when we're fearful and impulsive, or are we worse at making sense of what's true when we're fearful and impulsive? And so I think, the good news is if this was happening to lions, like imagine lions gained exponential capacities, like Zeus-like powers, and they were creating exponential climate change, but then you were trapped inside of the brain of a lion. So lions had the power of these gods, but lions don't have with their brains the capacity to be self-aware and say, oh my God, I'm creating that. Lions don't have, their brain is limited. So the kind of spiritual proposition here is, it's kind of interesting that we're the only species that has the ability to take our brains, point it out, and then loop back to point our attention back at our own selves and say, oh, that's how we work. That's how I'm getting hijacked by fear. That's why I'm making sense of the world and attracted to conspiracy theories. We're the only species that can even witness our own consciousness that way, which means we're the only species that could actually escape this kind of trap. And that's why we said it at the end of that article. That's why I brought it up, that the point is we have to make peace with ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's a profound moment, as you say, and fast forward, because this was a piece that was published in New York Times in December, January, February. We are in a totally different situation in the world, and we are being asked to sit with ourselves. We are more online, I think, because we are, that's how
that's what has to be.
That's what we have to be. If not, everything would stop. But on the other hand, we are making more food at home, or we are, well, some of us are, right? And we are now talking about a quite privileged group of us also that, can sit and maybe use this time for creating some reflection and headspace. Do you feel that have the conversations around in your circles change on the task and responsibility, and what we can, what good do technology could use for us, be of use for us?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, obviously the coronavirus is totally turned the world upside down, and there's a small group that is in a privileged position where, like you said, they can be at home working from home and technology. There's many people who are simply unemployed. But I think for those who are the information workers who are now, even if you're you lost your job, and many people are spending way more time on screens regardless of where you are in society. And we like to say that the premise of humane technology is that is kind of the metaphor of ergonomics. Ergonomics is the study of how the geometry of our body and our anatomy fit with the geometry of, say, a chair. If you sit in an unergonomic chair that's not well shaped for your back, and you only sit in it for 5 minutes a day, it's not such a big deal that the chair is not humane or ergonomic. But when you're in a chair for 10 hours a day, you really start to notice that it's not humane, right? Or ergonomic. And I think the premise of technology is, we've been trying to say for 8 years now The technology is not designed in a way that respects and aligns with the geometry of all of those emotions that we need: face-to-face connection and contact. We need physical touch. We need to be in touch with nature and ourselves. We need to not feel anxious. We need to be designing not to amplify our worst parts of ourselves, but our better parts of ourselves. And that's like an ergonomic alignment. Now, technology has not been aligned very well, especially in the attention economy, where the business model is to turn into, to have Facebook be kind of the Exxon of human anxieties and fear and extract off of that. But now it's become obvious because we're spending so much time on screens. So I think the first thing that's happened in terms of what's changed with coronavirus is everyone is now visibly aware of, well, social media is social and it's connecting, but it's now really clear that that's not enough. Because if I'm sitting at a screen for hours and hours a day in a flat thing, I don't feel good. No one feels good. And that's a universal human experience because it's about the universal ways that our emotions really need to connect with each other. So I think that's the one thing. The second thing is interesting is that the large technology companies are now being forced to not be neutral, to hide behind the fiction of neutrality. Up until this point, Facebook said, look, we're a neutral platform. It's like the ultimate democracy. We're not putting our finger on the scale. Whatever people click the most, whatever they like the most, whatever they share the most, that's what will bubble up to the top of our news feeds. And our fingers aren't on the scale.
That's you, not us.
But the problem is, it's the problem's you, not us, right? And so if people if they send the conspiracy theories around, that's your fault. That's your society. We're just holding up a mirror to society. But as Asa Raskin, my dear friend and co-founder at the Center for Humane Technology, says, technology is not holding up a mirror. It's holding up a funhouse mirror to society, like the distorted mirrors you see in the theme parks. And it's showing you, the kind of fear version of your society. It's amplifying the worst parts, the most exciting, dopamine and fear and polarization and outrage parts. And so one of the things that's happened is that, Facebook and these other companies are being forced to actually take a more proactive stance on things like coronavirus. And we wrote an article called From Inform to Persuade: How Technology Companies Have to Operate in the Public Interest, because it's never been more obvious. We rely on them as our public information infrastructure in this time. And when we move from a physical infrastructure of the 20th century, our roads, our telephone lines, our power lines, we have regulations to protect us here. And when we move to the digital 21st century infrastructure, we lose all those protections. So for example, down here in the physical world, we have an emergency broadcasting system. If there's an emergency, the televisions can switch over and they send the emergency broadcast. We didn't have an emergency broadcasting system for social media and for our 21st century information environment. So the technology companies are kind of building that now. Down here in the physical environment, if you're in Norway. If Russia or China try to fly a plane into Norway, you have a defense department that will try to, that are protecting the physical world. But if Russia or China try to fly a plane into the virtual infrastructure of Norway, which is the Facebook of the world, Facebook says, yeah, which zip code do you want to target? I've got a micro-targeting ad engine, right? So that you lose all those protections. So in general, I think what we have to see is that the technology platforms of today are the new 21st century infrastructure, for better or worse. And that means that they have to operate in the public interest. They cannot be privately interested about which information about the coronavirus makes them more money. They have to ask which is most true and helpful, because now the consequences are life and death, as what happened in many places. But in Iran, for example, there was fake news about drinking some kind of methanol, I think, solution that killed hundreds of people and sickened thousands of others in the hospitals. So it's really critical that the technology companies take responsibility. And then again, one last thing is, because they have exponential powers and they're reaching everybody, Facebook is operating in countries with hundreds of languages, and they're not able to filter and do proactive public communication about what's true or not in languages their engineers don't speak. There's 22 different languages in India. Do you think Facebook has, engineers that speak all 22 languages and appropriately filtering all that information? So mostly they're only doing this in English around the Western markets that are, that make the most noise and upset because it's not, the good information is not being spread. But just like climate change, like, the Western markets can protect themselves, but then, the global South gets the worst of it. And so just like that, we have the global human downgrading of the breakdown of truth and addiction and distraction, and the global South gets the worst of it. And so this is also, just like coronavirus, kind of a UV light showing our the vulnerabilities of our society.
Is it because you mentioned this downgrading of human, but you also in the article you mentioned this downgrading taxes on the big tech companies. Do we have we have a little bit of time? Like, could you just also because I think it was a very fascinating proposal, and are we there? Could it happen?
Well, I think that there's things in terms of policy and regulation. There's a lot of things that are possible now that I think people would never thought were possible. I mean, look at Andrew Yang proposing universal basic income, and that would have never gone through. And now you have Republicans saying, yeah, we need to send everybody in the United States a $1,200 check. I think that there's an ability to get things done now that we couldn't get done before. I think it's also obvious in the case of journalism, for example, that while everyone's using these social platforms more and more and more, they're making more money.
Yeah.
And guess what's happening to local newspapers? Media and journalism are dying, and they're dying because the social platforms have essentially extracted all this money away. So there's actually several countries, I think Australia, I think France, are actually passing laws now to tax the advertising-based business model companies and redistribute funds back into journalism, because they've essentially privately profited off of public interest information.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a fourth estate in a democracy that keeps your government in check, your society is broken. There's no system that doesn't, without oppositional forces, you cannot function well. It's like we have the angel and the devil on our shoulder. We have like little internal oppositional forces in our minds, but we need that for our societies. And I think we need to, regulate with a very comprehensive level of reform of technology. We like to say, just one last thing is, much like if you said, well, what law should we pass to get past the financial crisis of 2008? It's not one law. We need comprehensive reform. And because we were selling fake financial assets, like junk, financial bonds or whatever, and then packaging them up and then pretending that they were worth more than they were, with the attention economy, we're selling fake attention, thinner and thinner slices of junk fake attention to fake eyeball, selling fake attention to fake users, which are bots, to fake advertising. We know that Facebook inflated their reporting of advertising by 900% in one report. And it's just like we're going to have a democracy crash, just like we had a financial crash, because we're selling essentially fake attention assets. The business model is propped up, just like we had in 2008. And so I think this is a moment of reckoning that, again, we cannot have this extractive, junk-like attention economy. We need to have something that supports human wisdom. So that's what we have to do.
So in one sense, you can say like the situation that we found ourselves in has actually put these and open up and basically bubble up to the surface what was already there, and now we can kind of grasp it and look at it and talk about it maybe and hopefully also shift and on this large scale systematic level that we need.
I think exactly, and I think that this is a moment to see that runaway neoliberal capitalism without any guardrails or protections, in the same way that it creates climate change, that system does not work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. You have to have a system that's human-centered. Some people call it human-centered capitalism or anthropic capitalism, but that puts human beings at the center. And I view that as synonymous with humane technology, that it puts human wisdom at the center. Because the bug is we had human-centered design, right, in technology, and somehow we still ended up with these problems. And Aza and I like to say, the bug in human-centered design is that it puts human bugs at the center, human vulnerabilities and emotions at the center. So we need a deeper form of putting human wisdom at the center of the way that we actually design technology. Because if we're not designing around protecting that, around our higher capacities, our enlightened capacities, we will not survive. And that's the kind of call to arms that we have to both reform capitalism and reform our technology in the exact same way.
Starting with ourselves, starting inside and with our attention. And I guess I talk about love all the time, because it's like if you start from that and set your intention from that, it's helpful, at least. I think we're going to try to move over to the session.
Okay.
So we can do a Q&A. And so it's on your left there.
Click on sessions and
then find yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Ida.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. See you in a bit.